Filipino fans made their way to catch the Pinay tennis phenom in action.
I've been coming to this tournament for 10 years. So I'm excited we finally have a Filipino here again.
I got a selfie with her, and also this is my first ever tennis tournament ever. So I'm excited. It's special.
Filipino tennis star Alex Eala takes center stage at the BNP Paribas Tennis Paradise in Indian Wells. And of course, Filipino fans turn out in full force to cheer her.
Something is happening in the world of women's tennis right now, and if you've been paying even the slightest attention, you already feel it. There's a shift. A quiet, undeniable shift that started small, built slowly, and has now reached a point where tournament directors across the globe are making decisions they've never made before for a player they simply cannot ignore. Her name is Alex Eala. She's 20 years old, she's Filipino, and she is rewriting the rules of what it means to be a rising star in professional tennis. And the latest chapter in this story just dropped, because Markus Günthardt, the tournament director of the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix in Stuttgart, one of the most prestigious clay court events on the entire WTA calendar, has handed Eala a direct main draw spot. No qualifiers. No fighting through rounds just to earn a place at the table. She walks straight into the draw. And when you understand the full picture of everything that's been building around this young woman, you'll realize this wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was inevitable. So let's slow down and actually talk about what's going on here, because this story is bigger than tennis. Markus Günthardt is not a man who makes impulsive calls. He's been running the Stuttgart tournament for years. He understands prestige, he understands history, and he understands what it takes to keep a top-tier WTA event relevant in an era where attention is the most valuable currency on the planet. Stuttgart already has the pedigree. It has loyal fans, a beautiful venue, a rich tradition on clay. It doesn't need gimmicks. It doesn't need manufactured drama. But even a tournament with all of that behind it has to ask itself one honest question every single year. Is the world watching? And right now, in 2026, the one player who makes the entire world stop and watch is Alex Eala. So Günthardt did what any smart, experienced director does when the evidence is staring him in the face. He acted on it. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because this isn't just about Stuttgart. To understand why Günthardt made this call, you have to go back and look at what's been happening at every tournament that has crossed paths with Eala this season. You have to start with Indian Wells. What happened at Indian Wells in 2026 is going to be talked about for a very long time. Not because of any particular scoreline, not because of some dramatic final, but because of what one player did to the entire atmosphere of that event before the tournament had barely even started. The moment Eala's first round draw was confirmed, something extraordinary happened. Fans didn't just buy tickets. They flooded the platform. They overwhelmed the system. Ticket prices climbed to levels that tournament had never seen in its entire history. And when the dust settled and the accountants ran the numbers, a single first-round match, not a final, not a semifinal, a first-round match, had generated $5 million in ticket revenue. $5 million. For round one. That number alone should tell you everything you need to know about what Alex Eala means to professional tennis right now. But it's not just the money, and this is the part that really matters. It's who is buying those tickets. It wasn't just the regular Indian Wells crowd. It wasn't just the tennis diehards who follow every tournament on the calendar. These were people who had never been to a professional tennis match before in their lives. People who flew in from different countries, different continents, with one single purpose. To be there. To be in that stadium when Alex Eala walked onto the court. When a sporting event starts pulling in people who have no prior connection to the sport itself, something profound is happening. That's not a fan base. That's a movement. And the phrase that came out of Indian Wells to describe it, the Eala effect, has now spread to every tournament office on the tour. Every director has heard it. Every director is thinking about it. Then you look at what happened in Austria, at the Ladies' Linz Open, and the story gets even more remarkable. When the draw came out and Eala was set to face local favorite Julia Grabher, 90% of the tickets were purchased by Eala supporters. Not Austrian fans. Not Grabher supporters. Eala's people. They coordinated across borders, across time zones, and they descended on Linz in numbers that made Grabher, playing in her own country, feel like the visitor. Tournament director Sandra Reichel saw exactly what was happening and she responded immediately. She put Eala on the biggest court available. She made a public commitment to welcome her properly. And she said, openly, that the atmosphere in that building would be unlike anything the Ladies' Linz Open had seen in its 35 years of existence. 35 years. And it took one player, one match, to produce something that tournament had never experienced before. Günthardt read every word of that story. He understood what it meant. And then came Miami. James Blake runs the Miami Open, and Blake is someone who understands star power. He didn't hesitate. He put Eala on center court and he spoke candidly about what her presence was going to mean for the event. He talked about how her appeal had crossed the usual boundaries of tennis fandom, how she was bringing in viewers and ticket buyers from Asia, from Europe, from North America, fans who don't follow the WTA Tour regularly, fans who had one reason and one reason only to be in Miami. He predicted that the tournament would break revenue records because of her. Not because of the field overall. Because of her specifically. Günthardt has been taking notes on all of this. Every data point, every quote, every crowd reaction. And by the time it came to making his decision for Stuttgart, the answer wasn't even a question anymore. But there's a sporting dimension to this that gets overlooked in all the commercial conversation, and it's important. Stuttgart is clay. Clay is a surface that punishes you when you're tired, when you're not sharp, when your legs are heavy and your mind is carrying the weight of matches you didn't need to play. Qualifiers can do that to a player. They can drain you before the real competition even starts. By skipping Eala past that process entirely and placing her straight into the main draw, Günthardt isn't just making a business move. He's making a decision designed to give her the best possible chance to compete at her highest level from day one. He wants to see what Eala looks like on Stuttgart clay when she's fresh, focused, and fully prepared. And based on everything he's watched this season, he has very good reason to want exactly that. There's also a cautionary tale embedded in this story, and it deserves to be mentioned. Because not every tournament got this right. The Australian Open, one of the 4 biggest events in the sport, misjudged the situation badly. They placed Eala on smaller courts despite the scale of demand from her fanbase. What followed was a logistical nightmare. Hundreds of thousands of fans queuing for hours, many never making it inside at all. And here's the thing about moments like that. They don't cool people down. They heat them up. Eala's supporters didn't walk away frustrated and forget about it. They came back harder. They organized better. They became more determined. And every subsequent tournament that made smarter decisions, that gave her the court and the platform she deserved, reaped the rewards while the Australian Open quietly became the example of what not to do. Günthardt has no interest in being that example. He's too smart for that. And then there are the players themselves, because this story doesn't live only in the stands. Jessica Pegula is one of the most experienced competitors on the women's tour. She's been in big matches, big atmospheres, big moments throughout her career. She faced Eala at the Miami Open, and what she said afterward was striking. She described the atmosphere as something she had genuinely never encountered before. The fans weren't watching the match. They were inside it. Every single point carried a weight and an energy that Pegula said she had never felt in her entire professional career, whether it was a Grand Slam, whether it was Dubai, whether it was any of the biggest events she's competed in. Never felt anything like it. When a player of that experience says those words, the entire tour listens. And then Novak Djokovic, a man who has won more Grand Slams than anyone in the history of the sport, a man who has stood at the absolute summit of tennis for nearly 2 decades, called Alex Eala the greatest tennis player the Philippines has ever produced. Read that again. That is not a polite compliment for a young player showing promise. That is a declaration from someone who has spent his entire life studying greatness up close. Günthardt has heard all of it. Every quote, every crowd report, every ticket sales figure. He's watched the pattern repeat itself across tournament after tournament in 2026. And the pattern is clear. When Eala is given the stage she deserves, extraordinary things happen. The crowds are different. The energy is different. The reach of the tournament stretches into audiences it has never touched before. Günthardt looked at all of that and he made the only call that made sense. He put Alex Eala in the main draw. Not as a favor to her. Not as a marketing stunt. As a recognition of what is plainly, obviously true. She belongs there. She has always belonged there. And Stuttgart is going to feel it. The people walking through those gates on the days she plays are going to include people who have never watched a professional women's tennis match before. They're going to sit down in that stadium with no history of following the sport, and they're going to experience something that makes them want to come back. That's how sports grow. Not through advertising. Not through strategy documents. Through players who make people feel something. And that is precisely what Alex Eala does, every single time. So the question now is where this goes from here. Because tournament director after tournament director has made this same call in 2026, and yet the broader conversation about what Eala means for the future of women's tennis feels like it's still catching up. The WTA as an institution has enormous power to shape narratives, to amplify stories, to give players the platform that their impact demands. And you have to wonder whether the organization is moving fast enough to recognize what it has in this young woman, because the directors on the ground clearly already do. Stuttgart is next. And under Günthardt, it's going to be ready. So tell me what you think, because this conversation is genuinely worth having. Do you think placing Eala directly in the Stuttgart main draw was the right decision, and how much of it comes down to sport versus business? Could Stuttgart become the next Indian Wells? The next moment that people point to when they talk about the Eala effect? And do you think the WTA itself is doing enough to get behind a player who might be carrying the future of the entire sport on her shoulders? Let's talk about it.